I've said many times on this test that we need to be able to accurately predict the question, especially when this question type is involved, because it's very easy to just kind of go with your gut, read the sentence 4 times, and just pick the thing that sounds best. But there are rules here that need to be followed. And the way I would know that is even though my underlined portion does not include punctuation, it's right next to punctuation. And so I need to think in those terms. This is about grammar probably, so sentence structure is going to probably matter. And that also is reinforced by the fact that the word which is in one of my choices. Which is a word that usually helps me when I have run-on sentences. So this is about sentence structure. I'm going to need to think in those terms in order to guarantee that I get it right. Now, the other big problem here is that this is a very, very long sentence, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of text. That's a lot. And so it's going to be very difficult for me to follow the structure of the sentence if I just read it 4 times with the different answer choices and see what sounds best. I'm going to get lost in all this stuff. So I really need to make sure that I'm using another strategy and narrowing my focus as much as possible. I want to read the part that matters. I want to focus on the part that matters. So how do I do that? Well, for long sentences and for fragment and run-on questions in particular, we need to think about where the sentence begins and ends and gets interrupted and what's the main core of the sentence and how does this extra part that we're putting at the end kind of relate to that. So this is how I do it. All right. So I would start with this at the beginning. This may not be much of a problem with certain kinds of apples that are not naturally very fragrant. Okay, and I stop where the comma is because that shows the shift. And so what do I have here? I have a complete sentence that could just stand alone. This may not be much of a problem with certain kinds of apples that are not naturally fragrant. I could put a period right there if I wanted to. And then this comma, this such as, is adding on a little extra to just kind of like give me an example. But it's an extra piece. It is something I could remove from the sentence. It's not a sentence on its own, okay? Then something interesting happens. The word but. In this case, the word but is basically resetting my sentence. This is called a conjunction, and it's a valid way of connecting 2 complete sentences. Okay, so the green that I've already highlighted, in a way, that part's over. So I can kind of ignore that because we're starting a sentence over again. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to erase all that highlighting because I'm never going to go back to that part of the sentence. That's done. And I'm going to just consider that dead because we've ended that sentence and now we're kind of getting into the next sentence. And that's going to be the one to focus on because that's where my underlined portion is. Okay? So it's still confusing. So hopefully I can clarify a little bit. What's the main sentence here? All right. So the whole thing says, for apples that are prized for their fruity fragrance, such as Macintosh, this can be a problem with consumers. So just stopping there, the main sentence is this can be a problem with consumers. I've got a subject, this, and a verb, can, and it's a simple, complete idea that could just stand alone. So what is this stuff that came before it? There's 2 extra clauses. For apples that are prized for their fruity fragrance, this can be a problem with consumers. That pink part is an extra clause. And yes, even though there's commas, such as Macintosh is also an extra clause. It's an extra, okay? And so those things are attached at the beginning, and this is totally valid. This would be like if we didn't have a but here, the beginning of the sentence, an intro into the main thing. We do this all the time when we write. It's just weird here because it feels like the middle of the sentence because of, just everything that came before it. The word but is kind of resetting us here. So in my mind, I'm narrowing my focus and I'm saying, okay, the but starts things over. I need to think about sentence structure afresh, okay? It's confusing. But now I can come to the end here, and I can say, well, what function does this other piece, there's another comma, and that usually shows a shift in the sentence structure. So I have to think, what does this comma do? So this part here, that will reject apples lacking the expected aroma. It's supposed to be another addition to my sentence. It's another kind of descriptor adding on extra information. Now, the problem with it right now is that I'm violating a rule for commas that I'm usually supposed to follow. So the word that, T-H-A-T, does not usually have a comma when we use it to attach extra stuff to a sentence. So we do use it often to attach extra stuff. But for whatever reason in English, we just don't use a comma with the word that. We do, however, use a comma when we use the very similar word which. And which seems like a valid thing right here because that would attach this to the sentence, and very often which is a way that we attach extra stuff to a sentence. So that seems pretty good. Contrast that with choice B, which creates a run-on. If we just said, they will reject apples lacking the expected aroma, suddenly that pink extra clause becomes a green complete sentence. They will reject apples lacking the expected aroma. That's a complete idea that could stand alone. And I'm not allowed to attach that to another sentence with only a comma. You need to use a comma and something else, like a word like but or and, something like a conjunction. So that would be a very bad thing to do. And that's why thinking in terms of sentence structure helps us, because I don't think that choice B sounds bad. It sounds like two sentences. It's not about the sound. It's about the punctuation not being enough to connect these two sentences. Now, we haven't talked about choice D, which is the answer. And normally, when we talk about run-on sentences on the SAT, I say things like this. To fix a run-on, we replace a pronoun, which is what they is, with a word like which. So I seem to be violating my own rule here. Well, the key of the rule is it's not necessarily the word which, it's a word like which. And who is also a word like which. It's very similar, and it basically has the same function. It's not as common because we don't use it in every situation. There's only certain situations where we can use it. And the difference is that which is for things and who is for people. And since we're talking about consumers, we are referring to people. And so we use D, choice D, who, instead of choice C, which. But functionally, those two words are basically the same. Another version of this sentence might have used which to solve the same problem. It really just depends on what the structure looks like and what we're referring to and all that. But this is still a very conventional question in a lot of ways. It's got some difficult rules for us to think about, but we're thinking about them in a way that the SAT likes to use. Sentence structure, we're going to have to think about. Where does the sentence begin? Where does it end? What's extra? What are all these commas doing? How do they function? Where are conjunctions? Things like that. And so for run-ons, you're not going to necessarily be able to listen for the best answer. The best way to guarantee these points is to think about the rules, think about green and pink highlighting. And I know you can't do that in the test, but you want to kind of think it in your head. Where does a sentence begin and end? And hopefully you can kind of piece it all together and understand what you are allowed to do to attach other pieces to your sentence. There will be different versions of this with different solutions, but this is a very common solution. So hopefully, if nothing else made sense in what I said, you at least memorize this part. To fix run-on sentences, replace pronouns with, I'm going to add words like which, such as who. And that's what we did here, and whew, it was a long one, but I know I'm right because I followed the rules.